Michael, good morning.
Good morning.
Were you with us last week? Somehow I may have missed you last
No,
week.
I missed the last 2 weeks. I did do my follow-up, obviously, but I was working.
I see. Got it. I thought I hadn't seen you in a little bit. Well, welcome back. Glad to have you
No,
with
no,
us.
no, my apologies. I wanted to send you an email, and I'm like, ooh, here I am, and then not even be present. All good, all good.
But we'll meet you where you are. That's fine. Thank you. And
Yes,
good
I'm
morning,
I'm
Mavis.
I'm
Good morning, Martha. Martha, as usual, is right in front of the beautiful marshlands of the Cape. Always looks beautiful where you are.
It is a beautiful day today, and I actually have that virtual background because we are doing renovations and my interior of my house right now is studs. So I have to have something fake behind me.
Well, I'm sure your studs are awesome, but I love the grasslands there. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. So nice to see you all. Christine, good morning. So we're going to continue our conversations today with the third of the 10 principles. Remember, the whole point of these principles is these are frameworks for how you bring yourself to your business mentally and how you work through your business on a regular basis. And so we're going to go through the third of the 10th today, and then we're going to third of the 10 today, and then we'll follow up next time with a little more discussion around how to live it effectively. This is one that I think everyone can really relate to because it's around structure in the business. If I were to ask you, how many of you think your business would benefit if you had a little more structure in it? Please put it into the chat if you think that's you. Just put a yes or no, or maybe not. Give me a sense. How many of you feel that it would probably benefit your business if you had more structure to it? Okay, great. Those are just the kind of answers I would expect to see from everybody. And the reason is because almost everybody that I coach says that. Everyone that I've worked with since Chirag and I started doing this in 2020 comes to me and I say, well, what do you want to use the coaching for? How do you want to improve your business? Everybody, all guaranteed, somewhere in that first paragraph will be a sentence called, I need more structure. So I don't know that structure means the same thing to everybody, probably doesn't. But from what I've heard and listening to everybody, there's a couple different elements of that, a piece of which we'll be talking about today, which isn't structure per se, but it's actually organization. What I hear from a lot of people is that they live their life in a very reactive kind of it's in a reactive existence. They wake up in the morning with the best intentions to do something, and then something happens. A client calls at 8:30 or something happens at 9:30, and they kind of have to throw the plan out of the window, and they're just making the best that they can of the day or the week or the month. And so structure might mean for many people, yes, to have a more organized CRM, or to have a specific sales process, a process for working with sellers, or a process for working with buyers or something, and have it written down or something, maybe something you can hand to a client. All that makes perfect sense to me. But what we're going to be talking about today is the role of organization in helping us get things done. So I have some slides as always. We'll talk through them. I have a couple of questions for you, and then we'll come back and discuss a little further. So let me pull these up. And as usual, we'll talk through the element a little bit, and I'll give you the actual principle a little bit later in the slide deck. Okay. So we're going to talk about routines today around this topic of organization. Okay, there we go. Good. Okay. Habits and routines. And think about this in terms of a larger topic of organization. That is, how organized is my mind? How organized is my business? And what kind of results am I getting out of that? What different results might I get if I were organized or habitually did certain things in a different way? When I ask people about this, people I'm coaching or larger groups that I work with, I always say, are there certain areas of your business where you feel like you've got habits and routines that really serve you well? People say, yeah. And I say, are there other areas of your business that you think your habits and routines are really working against your success? And they'll say, yeah. And of course, one of the things that many people talk about is, well, I get hung up on social media, for a lot of time during the day. Or I'm always reacting to my clients and I never get to the things that I know are important because I always have to, do something else. We have to recognize that the way that we do business day after day after day after day is our habit. It is our routine. And we choose it. We choose it every day. And we choose, therefore, whatever results come from whatever it is we're choosing to do or not do or whatever it is we're choosing to spend our precious mind share on or not. So a couple things to think about. Here's one as inescapable truth about habits and routines and the results that come from them. Simply, our lives are a reflection of the actions we've chosen to take. Where you are today is a reflection of the choices that you've made over and over and over again. Now, it may be that some of those choices were not ones that were made over and over again. You may have chosen to move to a particular town and you only did it once. And of course, that does, create a reflection of how your life turns out, certainly. But a large amount of our life turns out because of the actions and behaviors that we've chosen over and over and over again. For example, the reason I can't play piano is I've never made the choice to practice to learn to play the piano. If I had dedicated an hour every single day for the last 15 years, a particular reflection of my life today would be that I'd have some skill on the piano. Same with golf or speaking a foreign language or anything else. At the same time, if I choose to do something different with my life, like learn how to cook, maybe after 15 years, I could become a good cook. The reflection that we have, or the reflection of our life, is the reflection of the choices that we've made over and over again. And so please note that we are making choices every day. When you choose to be on these calls week after week after week, you're choosing to invest in your own education, your own way of thinking, your own way of acting in your business. And it has some impact on there. And all the other things you do on a regular basis, whether you work out or not, whether you eat healthy food or not, whether you read a lot or not, whether you learn something or not, all these things are part and parcel of the results that you experience today. Let's talk about habits versus routines. I'd like to just make a little distinction here just for our discussion today. You don't have to accept this distinction if you want, but it is one way to think about what's the difference between a habit and a routine. We could all say that we have certain habits and we could all say that we have certain routines. The question we want to ask is, what kind of a life are those habits and routines creating for us? If your habit is to brush your teeth twice a day and floss and all that stuff, when you get to the dentist, yeah, probably the dentist says your teeth are in pretty good shape. If it's the opposite, maybe not. But what's the difference between a habit and a routine? Well, here's one way to think about it. A habit is a repeated action or behavior that do not require thought and attention. Something that's automatic, that's become automaticized. Here are some examples. These are things that you may do without thinking of at all. You've burned them into your mind in a certain way that you no longer have to think about those things. And that's the advantage. They can allow you to focus your attention on something else without failing to do these particular things, because you've ground them into your mind so many times that your body and your mind know how to do that. Of course, the most dangerous one here, or at least the one that might have the biggest impact on your business, is the fourth one. Many of us habitually check our SM feed without any particular mental investment in it. It's just kind of scrolling. And of course, we hear the stories of people staying up till 2 or 3 in the morning, laying in bed, scrolling through on stuff on their phone that really isn't that important. But of course, it does affect your sleep patterns. Contrasting that with a routine, which is a repeated set of actions and behaviors that require some planning and some active thought. So the difference here is whether you're actively thinking it through in the moment or not. And so when I'm talking about checking your SM feed, I'm talking about doing it in a rather absent-minded way as a habit. But if we're talking about a routine is kind of like habits stacked on top of each other. But for our purposes, we'll say it has this added element of thought that's required there, your attention to manage that effectively, answering emails, prospecting calls, etc. The weekly 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, for those of you who may not be familiar with that is the Chirag Shah Coaching approach to marketing. It's one approach. It's do these 5 things, do these 4 things, do these 3 things, do these 2, do 1. It's a simple 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's 5 calls to people in your sphere. That's 4 events a year. That's connect with 3 other agents, 2 handwritten notes a day, and 1 call to a current client to ask 2 simple questions. How are you experiencing our service at this time? And secondly, how could we serve you better? So some people do the full 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Some just do 5, 3, 1. Some do 5, 4, 2. Just some habits or routines that you can establish in your business to provide, yes, structure to your day and to the business. So habits versus routines. Now, how important are habits and routines to your success? A very important question here. If they're not important, then why are we talking about it? Obviously, they are important. And here's some of the reasons why. In times of uncertainty or stress, a habit and routine helps keep us sane. It helps us continue to move forward when things are unpredictable. It has tremendous value at a time when things are uncertain. Improving productivity. Once you groove a particular behavior, you get better at it. And I just threw in the note here that multitasking kills it. For those of you who love to multitask, you should know that the science is showing pretty clearly now that multitasking actually takes more time than focusing on one thing at a time. They've done multiple studies now where they found that when they ask people to go back and forth between two tasks and they add up the total amount of time that it takes to complete those two versus completing one task and then completing the second, they find that the multitasking actually is slower. There's something about the way our brain has to shift its functioning every time you pick up a different task that actually slows things down. And the research shows that multitasking can actually add about 20% of time to completing tasks compared to actually focusing on one task at a time and getting them to completion. Maintaining your focus on what matters. This is a big piece of structure from my point of view. When people live their life from a reactive standpoint, that is, I wake up in the morning and something blows my plan out of the water, and then I'm just reacting the rest of the day to this thing that this happened and that thing that happened to that client. Having a habit or a routine helps restore some kind of focus on the important stuff. My personal perspective as a coach is that to be successful in your work, you need to make sure that you're doing what's important, not just what's urgent. And many of us who lead our business by doing only what's urgent or doing what's urgent first all the time end up only reaching a certain plateau and have kind of a ceiling on your ability to grow the business because the things that are important are overrun or overruled by the things that are urgent. Our form structure are the actual stepping stones to achieving all longer-term goals. That when I started, the way to create a result in your life is a reflection of all the choices you've made before. If you put in that hour every day, practice that piano, even though you don't want to, even though you're tired, even though there's a lot of other stuff to do, blah, blah, blah. After 15 years of that, I can pretty much guarantee, even if you're tone deaf, you're going to have pretty good skill on the piano. So habits and routines matter. They matter in a lot of ways. These are just 5 of them. Of course, there's many more. Now, if they're so important and they matter, why is it that we're so bad at doing them? And this is where some research has some really interesting information for us. The fact of the matter is that what's important to us about habits and routines, the fact that we should be doing them regularly, the way our brain functions actually works against it, or at least sometimes can. And so my intention here is for you to understand how this happens so that you can remember when it happens to you that your brain won't take you down the wrong track. In other words, the point here is we want to select the habits and routines that are important to us, and we want to be working with those steadily time after time after time after time. But what is it that takes us out of the motivation? For example, every salesperson on the planet knows that you need to do some lead gen, right? You need to pick up the phone and call people, or you need to meet people. You need to do something to develop new relationships. Everybody knows that, and yet nobody does it. Or let's say many of us don't do it as well as we like or as well as we ought to. If I were to ask you, let me just throw this into the chat. Do you believe that you spend adequate time in lead generation to achieve the goals that you have for your business? Or do you get distracted or caught up in other things? Yep, a lot of no's there. Great. So that's what I see with everybody. 95% of the people will answer that same way. You know what? I know I need to do it, but I'm not doing it. Great. So as a coach, my question is, why are you not doing it? Right? We all know it's important. If you agree with any of the things on the previous page, that this stuff does matter to the success of the business over time. What does that mean for us, and how we spend our time and attention? Well, research has a very interesting, perspective on this. This is quite clear right now. And that is this idea of risk and reward, or let's just say investment and reward. What we find is the research shows pretty clearly that when the positive outcome of a given act, whether it's habitual or not, is both certain and immediate, we get a high degree of compliance or investment in that particular action. For example, Let's say you saw a big metal fence and behind it is all this huge electrical equipment and huge wires and a big sign on the fence that says, "Caution, don't touch this fence or you'll be zapped by 50 trillion volts and you'll die instantly." We can pretty much guess that most humans would not reach out and say, "Let me touch that fence." Because the consequence of touching that fence is both certain, that is, I know I'm going to die, I can't survive 50 trillion volts, and immediate, it's going to happen right away. And so in a situation like that, we might reasonably expect that almost nobody would reach out to that fence. But what about if the results of a particular behavior you choose to take or not take are certain, but in the future? What we find is a much lower level of compliance or investment in those behaviors. For example, smoking. Everyone knows nowadays that if you smoke for 40 years, there's a very high possibility that you're going to get lung cancer at some point. It's not certain, true, it's not 100% certain, but it's pretty high, right? We know that there's a very high percentage of people who end up smoking for a long, long, long time end up with cancer. So why do some people smoke? Why doesn't everyone not smoke? Well, it's not 100% certain, but in any case, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's something if I do have to worry about it, I'll worry about it 30 years from now. So we get some lower level of compliance there. Similarly, in the lower right, if the consequence might be immediate, but it's uncertain, again, we'll have a slightly lower level of compliance or motivation or investment. For example, seatbelts. Everybody knows that seatbelts save lives. Why do some people choose not to wear seatbelts? Or why do we choose not to wear seatbelts sometimes? Well, the consequence of not wearing your seatbelt could be immediate, for sure. If you don't wear that seatbelt and you have that accident, yeah, it's an immediate consequence. But the chances that you have an accident the next time you get in the car this afternoon is uncertain. In fact, it's probably fairly low. Most of us have been driving for years and years and years before we have an accident, or it's years between an accident. So we have pretty high confidence that the certainty that I would actually be in an accident in the next hour in the car is very, very low. And so we have relatively lower compliance there. It's all about motivation. And finally, the case where consequences are future oriented and uncertain, we get very little investment or very little continued investment. And this is where the calls come in. Because if you had to pick up the phone right now and call somebody, a cold call, the chances that that person is going to be a client for you is highly uncertain. In fact, you know it's very, very likely that that person won't become a client because you need hundreds and hundreds of calls to have a chance at getting a client. And even if you do get the client, it may be that it's something in the future, not now. They may say, yeah, I want to meet with you in 2 weeks. We'll talk a little more, and then I'll think about it a bit. Or, yeah, I'm kind of thinking about my house, but, I don't really have to move right now. And so when the consequence is uncertain and in the future, it's very easy for us to say, I should focus on something else. Look at the difference between the lower left red and the upper right green as far as telephone calls go for sales gen, for lead gen. If you knew that the next phone you picked up, the next time you picked up that phone and dialed some number you've never dialed in your life before, absolutely, 100% absolutely would be somebody that says, I want you. Here's my check. And immediately they'll say that. Say, hi, my name is Martha Knapp. Okay, you got my business. Do you think you'd pick up the phone? Absolutely you would. Same thing with a lottery ticket. If you could look into the future for the pick tonight, and you knew what that number was going to be, if you knew it absolutely 100% certain and you knew that it was going to get picked tonight and you'd be awarded that thing tonight, you think you'd fail to go and buy a ticket and write in those numbers? Absolutely not. And so this is where our brain tends to work against us, folks. Without even thinking about it, we've made a decision in our mind that this particular activity may result in an uncertain benefit for me. And even if it is uncertain, still it's going to be in the future, not now. And this is the primary reason why we don't do some of these habitual things that we should do. Same thing with brushing your teeth. You can brush your teeth and it'll probably be fine for a while. Maybe they'll fall out after 20 years. I don't know. Or maybe they won't. It's uncertain. So why should I bother? So this is a really important piece of research. It's been validated over and over again by now, to understand that the way our brain assesses risk and reward works against us. And it works against us so effectively that that's why you get all those no answers to my last question. Everyone knows that this is important, but we fail to do it. The big reason why is the consequence of the choice to pick up that phone or send that mailing out is both uncertain and perhaps future oriented rather than certain and immediate. On the other hand, if a client is calling you and they say, I got a problem and I'm really pissed off and you need to solve this problem, that's much more of a certain and immediate issue for you. If you can fix this problem immediately, you get the client's appreciation. Wow, you're the best. And it's almost certain that if you can solve this problem and do it right for them, they'll be happy. So it's no surprise at all that if you have a choice between making a few more phone calls and dealing with something that you perceive as urgent in the business right now, almost always going to choose this. The risk for us is that we'll always end up choosing what we deem as urgent. But part of that decision that it's urgent is not just about a timeline or a deadline, but it's also some kind of a semi-unconscious assessment of the certainty and the immediacy. If I don't solve this problem for the client right now, I will definitely lose my client and it'll happen immediately, right? And so that causes us to make the choice to serve the client right now rather than make a call, let's say. So here's the principle. Understand today, tomorrow, and always, your habits and routines are the building blocks of your success or failure. Yes, we make other big decisions to hire this person or hire that person. Yes, we make decisions as to whether to offer a staging service or not. Yes, we make decisions about percentages and commissions and that kind of stuff. Yes, we make decisions once in a while about whether to go to Compass or go to somebody else. But the much larger impact, or at least an equally large impact, is the everyday little habits and routines that are contributing to your future experience. As sure as our habits of eating are going to have some impact on our health 20 years down the road, all the choices that we make to do something or not to do something, or to invest our time and attention and money in one thing or another, pays off down the road, either for us or against us. That's why this principle is here, is we need to recognize that everything matters. So how can you act on this for this week? Well, here's a simple step or two you could take. Write down a list of your daily habits. You could make a list of your professional ones and personal ones. And create a list of your routines. What are your normal routines for the day? What is it that you spend time doing over and over and over again in a more thoughtful way? Checking emails, or figuring out your to-do list, or looking at your calendar and thinking about what you need to plan during the course of the day, whatever those things are. And ask yourself, are all these things working? Are they working for me? Are they consistently paying off good dividends to me in the form of success in my business? And if not, ask yourself, okay, what's going on there? You could do this, you could reflect on your own, you could grab a partner, you could say, here's some things that I'm working on in my business. And I realize that some of these things are pretty good. Some of these things are not working so well for me. And you could have a conversation with yourself or with another about a different way to do things. But I want to caution you against jumping right into a fix. One of the problems that we have, and this is, part of the challenge here as well in terms of habits and routines, is we want a quick fix. We want the easy answer. I guarantee you 75% of the people who sign up for our coaching or anybody's coaching, they want the magic secret nugget that's going to turn their business into this money-making machine without having to invest a lot more money, without having to spend a lot more time and all that stuff. I wish it were that easy. I wish I could just give you a list of 5 do's and 5 don'ts. Say, do these 5, don't do those 5. And whoever you are, wherever you are, you're going to have the business of your dreams. Of course, humanity is not that simple, right? We're all individuals. The people we serve are all individuals. Moving through complex processes like this requires, a whole host of elements. One of which is this organization element. So I caution you against simply saying, yep, this isn't working. What should I do instead? I would suggest that you spend 95% of your time thinking, why is this not working? How could I do it differently before you make any kind of a call to make a change? And that's why it could be helpful to have this conversation with somebody else, because your own thinking is a little bit limited. We all have certain limitations of what our brain can think of as alternatives or how we might see why something's not working for us. But if you pick one thing in your business that's a habit or a routine that you think is not contributing to the kind of success that you want to experience, then you can be in a reflection about, what's happening there. All right. So let's come back with a couple of questions. So who has a question about any of this stuff? And if the question is, how do I live it? That's not the question for now, because I want all of you to think about this, and we'll talk more about it next week. I'm going to ask you how you kind of live effective routines and habits and those kinds of things. But do you have a question about anything that I've shared today, or a comment about how this relates to you and your business? Feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll hear from one or two of you. Mavis, please go ahead.
So I always thought of routines being habits that you stack up one after another. For example, for me, true story, I hated brushing my teeth. I grew up, I went to the dentist as a kid and it was just nightmarish, but I just hated the whole thing. So somewhere along the line, somebody said, "Oh, you ought to brush your teeth. What do you love in the morning?" I said, "Oh, I love my morning shower." And they said, "Brush your teeth in the shower." And that just changed everything. Brushing my teeth in the shower. Now it's like I look to brush my teeth, So, and I know that's not most people's issues, but I'm thinking about that in terms of real estate, in terms of our habits, trying to come up with a routine, hooking them onto something that we already love to do. Is that a question?
Yep.
But it's kind of,
Yep.
that's what the question is.
Thank you for sharing that. So, habit stacking is a concept that you could read about in Atomic Habits, for example, which is a James Clear book. It's one good book on habits. The other one that you can consider is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, Duhigg. The Power of Habit, and the other is Atomic Habits. They're both good. People like one or the other, or read them both if you have some more interest in this. But yes, habit stacking is creating time in your calendar to get a particular habit done at a particular time, and then adding others on top of it so that it becomes a routine. One way to think about a routine is a series of habits in some kind of a predictable and repeatable series. And for many people, that approach works because the time is already dedicated and it doesn't cost much more time to add one more habit to it. Just remember that routines also require some kind of a thoughtfulness element to it, right? The distinction we made before between a habit and routine is the amount of mental space that you need to allow to achieve some of those things. So that's one distinction that you can make. But even if you don't really want to go with that and you just want to think routines are just a bunch of habits stacked together, that's okay. But you need to know that why is that particular time there, and why am I choosing to actually use that time for that or not? Thank you. Let's hear from someone else. Who else has a question or a comment about any of this?
I have a question, actually. I'm working with a lot of absentee owners. I'm down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and I have like situations where, let's say they have an investment property, tenants move out, the residence has to get rehabbed of some sort, repainted, and a lot of work comes into play. So I'm trying to wrap my mind around about this whole, getting distracted and putting too much time into it, which I'm right now in the process. For an example, tenant moves out, it's furnished, the whole furniture has to get replaced, blah, blah, blah. The owner lives, in Europe. And I'm like in the middle of this, like, I counted my minutes, literally, I spent, and I came up already with 30 hours I spent in this project, which is like more or less a real working day, a working week for most.
Sure.
And in the meanwhile, I'm, can't focus on, as you said, prospecting, or, I know a unit may come on the market, I have to intervene to get that listing and all that good stuff. So the question is, how do you find balance? And I know this may be not an answer you can give, but like, how do I find balance in like saying, this is what I can do, but I cannot do this. You have to pay for it. And the owner is like, well, then I go with another person. You know what I mean? Like, if you're not willing to help. So it's like the service aspect, which I realize over doing it for 20 years takes way more time and energy and that anyone may think it does. So how can one combat this part?
Thank you, Michael. I'd like everyone to think about that. And if someone has a thought about it, we won't have time to go into it today because we're at time. But if anyone has a thought about this, send Michael an email or something after this, or reach out to him with your own thoughts on it. I'll say only today that, when we can think about this a little more next week, perhaps, but I'll say today that, the word balance means a different thing to everybody. And we have to make sure that we remember that we're tying our actions and activities to our goals. If we forget what our goals are and we just get caught up only in the activities, then we're likely to end up investing ourselves in certain activities that are not moving us to our goals and might actually even be, counterproductive for our particular goals. And so if you're going to say, my goal is to earn this much money or have this kind of a business by the end of this year or throughout this year, you need to ask yourself, does my investing 30 hours in each of these transactions, move me towards my goal? And if it does, you keep doing it. If not, then you think of another way. You either say, I hire somebody else to do that so I can do the other things that I need to do. Or maybe it's, I shouldn't be in this part of the business because, it's too much time and it prevents me from doing other things that are going to help me achieve my goals. We have to always maintain the link between your intended outcome and the effort. And habits and routines have such an important impact on the outcome that it's worth our investing some time thinking about what is the direct result of my time and energy and money spent in these particular activities versus, the cost of not doing something else instead. It's not a perfect answer, Michael, but ultimately we all make business decisions. And in fact, we're making them all day long, right? It's just most of them are unconscious. When we choose to keep working on this rather than putting it down and working on that, we've made a decision. We made perhaps an unconscious decision that's going to redound to the results of our particular business. And so right. the potential loss of choosing something else versus, choosing A versus B is something to always consider. And my experience working with most agents is we don't think about that quite enough. If I were to ask
you, I think the problem is really the consumer thinks, okay, we have someone there and they handle everything, like project manager or property. Yep. How do you call those people? Property managers, which is obviously 10% of whatever per month.
Yep.
And we are not property managers.
Yep.
Right. So all right. So it
remember that the roles and the activities that you put into your business always reflect your goals, or should. Okay, folks, I'm sorry. Sorry, Martha, I can't take your comment today. We're a little bit over everybody's time. Thank you for being here today, everyone. Martha, if you want to send me something, please do. But sorry, we're a couple minutes over it today, everybody. Have a great day. Look forward to seeing you next week where we'll talk more about this.